Good evening, everyone. Welcome to tonight's class on hand studies in pen and ink. I'm your instructor, Adrienne Hodge, and tonight's class is a one-off class, but it's a standalone class, but it is a little bit of a continuation from the class that we had last week on sketching hands in graphite. So if you find that drawing the hands tonight is a little challenging, then you might want to check out last week's class, which you can find on YouTube. And our moderator, Rich, is dropping that in the chat right now. And if you're watching later on YouTube, you can just search sketching hands and my name, Artist Loft. It should come up. So last week we looked at just a very generic pose of a hand, just like out like this, but we really broke it down, diagramming the hand, looking at the 3 dimensions of the hand, and I remembered the rest of the title of the class. It was drawing hands in using hatching and cross hatching, because tonight's class we're going to be using pen and ink, and we're going to continue using hatching and cross hatching. So, but yeah, we really talked about just the basic 3-dimensional form of the hand, and broke it down to its contour lines and value shapes. We did some blind contour sketches to really warm up our eyes and make sure that we were seeing those 3 dimensions of the hand. So that's a very helpful class if you find tonight's class challenging, but I've also got a lot of tricks up my sleeve that are going to make tonight's class pretty easy and foolproof. We're all going to have, I think, a product that we're happy with, because I've got some tricks to help us get there. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and switch to my tabletop view and go over supplies, and we'll get started. Don't forget to tag your work that you make from tonight's class with the hashtags Make It With Michaels or Michaels Classes, and you can follow me on Instagram at @AdieHodge, and I'm also on Facebook. Adrienne Hodge Fine Art is where you can find me on Facebook. And if you happen to be in the Austin area this weekend, I am participating in the Austin studio tour because I'm a practicing professional artist in addition to being a teaching artist, and I have a huge body of work featuring work like this, lots of ethereal, abstract cloudscapes and skyscapes. You can find my website, my online shop, if you're interested in my artwork as well, and you're not in the Austin area, but we do this fun event every year, and this is my 8th year participating in the east side of the Austin studio tour, so that's exciting. Stop number 252. I'm either 251 or 252, my studio mate and I. You know, we're 2 different stops, but we're at the same location. Anyway, all right, moving on. So tonight's class, we are just using, I've got an Artist Loft drawing pad, and then I have some Artist Loft illustration pens. Any illustration pens will work for tonight's class. I've got some sketching pencils so that we can do a little bit of preliminary sketching, and then we'll go over it with our pen and ink. And then let me just pull up our reference images real fast here. They are the same reference images that we used last week. Same document, but we're just scrolling down. So last week we used this image, and we had some different versions of that image. And then this week we're going to be using these 2 images, or this one image. It's just one image, but we're going to create 2 different drawings from the same image of this hand. And this is a model named Demetrius, who I photographed a while back for some other figure drawing classes that I've done for Michaels. And so I made the photograph. We've got the true color version of the photograph, and then we have the black and white version. And then I made it inverted, the black and white version, so that we can see the inverse of the light there. All right, I'm gonna set that aside. And then one unofficial supply that I can't recall if I actually put it on the supply list is, but should be easy to grab something like this real quick. I've got a playing card. You could also use a post-it note or a business card, something that we can trace and get this frame. So we're going to be tracing our playing card, or something rectangular would be good. A business card would be good. So I'm just going to pause for a moment and let you grab that. And I'm going to tear this out. So I have it handy, pun intended. I made that same pun last week. Can't help it. And get a blank page going here. So I'm not going to do any. Typically before a class like this, I would do like, let's break down the hand and, look at the 3 dimensions of it and all that fun stuff to get us kind of warmed up. But since last week's class was technically one big warm up for this week's class, even though they both stand alone, we're just going to jump right into it tonight. Oh, look, I already have. I must have been doing something else in here and changed my mind. I use this same card a lot to frame things lately. I should say that I learned this trick from, I've said this multiple times, but I should say it every time. My good friend Jenny Granberry, who teaches at, well, she used to teach at the Contemporary Austin here in Austin, where I teach as well. But she just moved to Santa Fe. But anyway, she's got lots of videos on YouTube as well if you want to search Jenny Granberry. But she taught me this trick of using a business card or a card like this to trace for our little frame. And I like it because especially the playing card has the little rounded edges on it, or sometimes I use this tarot card that I have here and it's got rounded corners as well. It just makes a nice little frame, and then your thumbnail can have a nice little frame to it. So we're just going to stack these one on top of the other. I'm doing it over on the left. You could do it in the middle of the page. You could do it to the right on your page, however you want to frame it. And whatever pencil you want to use, but I recommend using an H pencil, keeping your lines nice and light, because we want to go over this with our pen. And when we go over it in pen, I'm going to encourage us to go really lightly and maybe leave a few little gaps, use very light pressure on our pen so that we can get this line to be a little broken and kind of open-ended. And that'll give it a nice little implied line effect. And we are going to do a little bit of preliminary stuff with the pen and ink, but I just want to go ahead and get our hands sketched out here, and then we'll pause and we'll talk about the shading techniques that we're using and some tricks and tips for the pen and ink as well, and then we'll start adding our pen and ink. First, we're just going to jump right into it. I don't need to outline those lines again. So I've got two rectangles stacked on top of each other, just like our frames right here. All right, nice and light. So you might not even be able to see that on the Zoom screen right now. I know when we use graphite in these classes, sometimes it doesn't show up until I start to make it a little darker. Okay, so let's look at these images a little bit and talk about our strategy here tonight. This is where I said that I had all these tricks up my sleeve here. So first of all, proportions. I don't want you to worry about proportions too much with this exercise. And we're going to call this an exercise or a study, even though the product that we have here does look pretty cool. And, when we do something like this, it's easy to think about how the product is going to look. But I still want you to think about it as an exercise or a study or an exploration. Label it with those words so that you don't put too much pressure on yourself about the product. And I don't want you to worry about proportions, meaning I don't want you to worry if the fingers are the right size in relationship to each other. I don't want you to worry about if the thickness or the thinness is the right size. So you can just write that off and just, let it go out the window. We're not worried about that. Unless you are, then, that's on you if you're worried about that. I'm not worried about that. What I want us to focus on is the line work that we're using. So the hatching and the cross hatching and the overall three-dimensional forms that we have here. So we might end up with something that looks kind of, you know, interesting in a way, like maybe the thumb is a little big or the fingers are not quite the right size. Maybe that will draw the viewer into this little window that we've created and make them more interested in this composition, because we're really working with an interesting composition by, it's a device that we're using here, having the image go out of the frame like this. So that's our main concern. And then we're going to have this cool background. So I've done a lot of the heavy lifting for us by organizing this concept and this idea that it is going to be cool. And we don't need to worry too much about perfection here, because I know drawing with pen and ink can make people anxious and worried about having perfection in some way. So the other thing that I did here is we're zooming in. We're zooming in on part of the hand, and we're cropping off a large part of the image. I'm always like, whenever I can see my reflection in the iPad there, it's so distracting to me. I'm like trying to go off screen slightly. So by zooming in on part of the hand, it kind of makes it so that your proportions can be off and the viewer might not notice, because you possibly are only going to draw this little part of the finger and then this finger and this thumb. Like that's how I cropped it right here. And the way that everybody zooms in is going to be different, because you'll notice I did not include the cropped versions of the hand that I used here. So that, and I did that on purpose because I wanted ours to be a little different, and I didn't want people to get too concerned with perfection if your composition didn't match mine exactly. So that's why I did that. And so we're zooming in, we're cutting things off, and we're creating, that's going to make it cool no matter what. And the line work that we're going to add is going to make it cool no matter what too. Okay. And yeah, so we're going to be zooming in different ways. You might focus on, you might have, your image might look more like this, just like the pinky finger and that part of the finger. Or it might be just the thumb like this. You might crop it that way. Or you might, well, I guess that's pretty similar to the one I already did. But you might have it over here on this side coming out this way. So think about the different ways that you might be cropping this image in order to sketch it here. And whenever you get it cropped the way that you want it, I suggest that you take a little screenshot. So I'm gonna pull up the image on my phone real quick here, just in case. And I'm assuming everybody's looking at these images on a device, like, and an iPhone or an iPad, but if you have a printout version of the photo, then you could just take your playing card and put it right over the part of the hand that you plan to draw and trace a little frame that way and crop it that way for yourself. Or maybe you could take an extra sheet of paper and cover up. You could take a couple of sheets of paper and cover up the part of the hand in the printout. Actually, taking a piece of paper like this would be a nice way to make a decision about how you want to frame it, because doing that enables you to kind of see it a little better than zooming in. So that might be helpful. Just have a sheet of paper handy to do it that way. Okay, but I just want to show you how to do a screenshot because I realize not everybody might know how to do that. Okay, so I'm just gonna zoom in, and then on the iPhone, if you, oh my gosh, I'm trying to make all these pop-ups go away. So I'm gonna press down my home button and then my volume up button at the same time, and should be able to take a screenshot that way. And if you don't have the PDF should have been included along with the supply list. So I saw somebody just asked, where do I get the photograph? Okay, so we are cropping our photos the way we want to draw them. That way everybody's gonna have a drawing that's a little bit different, and we're not going to be too concerned if ours doesn't look exactly like mine, and we're not going to be concerned if the proportions are off. And that will also enable you to choose your own adventure and draw the part of this hand that is maybe the easiest for you, if the way that I cropped it isn't that for you. Okay, and then I made it black and white. So we were looking at the black and white version, and then I inverted the light, and that's going to help us to see all of these lovely shapes of shadows and shapes of light. Although in the inverted light photo, it does tend to wash out a lot of these, well, it's reversing the dark values. So since the photograph is rather dark in the center of the hand, when it reversed it, all the lights become dark, all the darks become light. So a lot of the dark values that are now white do appear a bit washed out, but it really helps us to see the highlights a little better. So all the highlights are what are showing up dark. And so that's where we want to plan ahead, and we want to leave blank paper. And we're going to exaggerate some of the highlights a little bit, just for the sake of contrast, of having some high contrast between dark and light. So that's something to take note of. And I'll talk about that as we sketch here, that we want to leave our plan ahead for where those light areas are, so that we're going to leave it blank paper. All right, let's get started sketching our hands. Set them aside and zoom in on the hand here. Although actually, I might do the thing with the piece of paper myself, just so that I don't have to keep zooming in and out. And I think I'm going to crop it a little bit different this time. So I'm going to look at it like this. Try to do these 3 fingers. It's a little different than what I did before. Okay, so what we're looking at as we start to sketch here is the negative space. And the negative space is really our best friend tonight. I want you to get really well acquainted with this negative space. So the space in between the fingers, and think about the outer frame of wherever you're cropping it. So wherever you're cropping it, you're going to have an edge to the image. My goodness. You're going to make those pop-ups stop popping up. So the edge of the frame, wherever you're zooming in, there might be a line right here that you're considering the outer edge of the frame. And you're looking at that negative space shape that is created from the edge of your frame in between the fingers. It's going to be these V shapes or these organic shapes that we're seeing here. That's what we're going to sketch first. And sketch lightly, give yourself permission to maybe do this more than once. Don't expect yourself to be perfect on the first time, but also accept that maybe your proportions will be off, and that's fine. And we're still going to have a cool product, even if they are. Okay, so I'm just going to start sketching the negative space that I'm seeing. I might end up with something that looks pretty similar to my other one. So I'm just looking at the space in between the fingers. That's all I'm drawing right now is the negative space in between the fingers. And I'm trusting my eyes. Last week in the other class, we did some blind contour practice, which can really help warm up looking so that you trust what your eyes are telling your hand to do and you don't let your brain get in the way too much and tell you that that's wrong. Because our brain lies to us all the time. I don't know if y'all know this, but thoughts are not facts. But your eyes, when your eyes are telling your hand what to do, that's what you should listen to. You should listen to your eyes. Your eyes can see the shapes, and your brain has all this information that it's going off of that could be saying, that's not what a thumb looks like. So just ignore those thoughts because they're not real. There's like cars passing by on the road. There's a thought. Okay, ignore that thought. What are my eyes telling me? All right, I started drawing the thumb. I said I was going to just draw the negative space, but then I started talking about, I got all existential on y'all and started drawing the thumb. Okay, so yes, there's not too much to those negative space shapes. And then once you get those negative space shapes in there, you can start to draw a little bit more defined edges that you're seeing. But don't get too detailed because we want to look at the light here. Okay, so that's all the negative space that I'm seeing. But before you don't, I don't want to say don't do this because everybody is different. Everybody prefers to do, I'm not the boss of you. You can do whatever you want. But I would advise that you not press down too hard on your pencil. So if you're having trouble seeing my drawing, hopefully, I feel like I can see it on the Zoom screen right now. So hopefully it's showing up for everybody else. Although sometimes when I watch the playback on Zoom, things really don't show up as much as they do live. Okay, so we've got those negative space shapes and maybe you defined some of your edges a little bit more, but I'm keeping my lines super light because I'm going to go over this in pen. So I don't want to press down super hard or put too much value on here because then I won't be able to erase. And if you feel like if you maybe don't have pens and you're just doing this in graphite tonight, then obviously you can go ahead and put that dark and light value in there with the pencils. The next thing I'm going to look at is the shapes of the shadows and the shapes of the light, which we spent a lot of time talking about last week. So I'm not going to go too much into it, but they're these little organic shapes and they follow the contours of the form. So they follow those elevational lines that we spent so much time talking about last week as well. And sometimes you have to look for them because they don't have a clearly defined edge. The value shifts so subtly from dark to light. Like I would say, it's pretty dark here on the edge of the finger, but then as we get to right about here, this mid-tone value starts to shift to light in a way that is so blended and gradual, it might be kind of hard to see a clearly defined shape here, but still try to find this little bit of an organic shape. It's going to be an open-ended shape, but we're going to go ahead and give it a little bit of an edge. You know what? Maybe I will do a darker version here because I'm just afraid it's not showing up on the Zoom and that y'all probably would like to see what I'm drawing here a little better. So let me draw it on a piece of scratch paper here, a little darker for us. I'm just going to go ahead and use a 4B and make it nice and dark. Okay, so I'm looking at the relationship of the fingers to each other. That was a little too high. Like now that I'm drawing darker, I'm drawing lines that I need to erase. I'm letting my thoughts get to me. Okay, so looking at the value shapes here, we're looking for something like this. Okay, but I would not advise drawing the lines as dark and hard edged as I just did. I want you to draw them nice and light so they can easily be erased, but this is the kind of organic shape that I'm looking for, is where does the dark hug the side of the finger like that? Okay, or like over here on the thumb, seeing something like this. Again, it's not, I would not put it this dark of an edge, but we're looking for some organic shapes like this. And what I find really helpful is to name the shape as something else other than what it is. So like, let's look at this value shape here, this shape of this shadow, and I just sketched it again in the pencil, and ask ourselves, what else could that shape look like? What else could it be? I would say maybe a little crescent shape, or maybe like a little thorn. Like if I turned it on the side right here and I thought, I'm not looking at a finger, but what does this particular shape of shadow look like? It could maybe be a blade of grass. The whole thing could be grass, and these particular blades of grass are sticking up higher than others. So we're looking for these organic shapes, and naming them as something else sometimes makes it easier than calling them shadows on fingers, because again, our brains, those pesky brains, get in there and make it more complicated than it needs to be and say, oh, drawing a finger is hard. That's not what a finger looks like, etc. So saying I'm just drawing a little blade of grass shape right here can make it easier. Could also be like a heart rate monitor. And I think the entire finger, when you draw these shadowy shapes, it looks like a baguette. Looks like a loaf of French bread. So if what you sketched looks like a baguette, you're doing it right. Okay, so we're sketching these value shapes into our finger shapes here, and we really don't have that much to draw because we're zooming in so far here. So we're looking at those shapes and getting those sketched in. And by doing this, by having the light be accurate, the light is telling us everything that we need to know. And that's like the main idea in representational drawing and painting. The light is telling you everything you need to know. And if you can just draw the accurate shapes of the light that you're seeing, you're going to capture something that's realistically like what you're looking at. You're going to capture that bend in the finger that's happening, which is foreshortening because there's all this information here. We know the finger is nice and long, but the finger is curled towards us, so there's information missing. And our minds again want us to draw all the information that we can't see, but we want to just draw the information that we can see. And we already got the outline by looking at the negative space. So now we just need to look for those shapes of value. And if we put the value shapes on exactly like we're seeing them, then it should look like the finger is bending towards us. And we don't even need to necessarily think about the contours and all that other stuff that we talked about last week, even though it is very important. But I know that there are going to be some of us in the audience tonight who might not have seen last week's class or are missing some practice that might help them in this journey, help them along this journey to drawing these hands. So I'm trying to simplify it as much as possible and just take out all the stuff that we don't need and just focus on what we do need to be successful with this exercise and get something that looks cool. Okay, so again, I'm just looking at the shapes of the shadows and the shapes of the light and how they fall within this particular shape here. And I should be capturing something resembling this partial view of this curled up hand. But again, let's go back to our pep talk that we started with, because I know that some of you are probably getting results that possibly don't look like mine or how you want them to look. And remember, we're not worried about perfection. We're not worried about proportions being exact. We're just trying to capture a cool effect here. And we're going to trust the process that when we add the pen and ink, we're going to have that. We're going to have a cool product. It also helps to not let these fingers be perfectly cylindrical shapes. We want those little ins and outs that are happening. So when I first drew my negative space shapes, I kind of made them very exact. So I'm just going back in and adding those little indentions where I see them. And I am drawing a little darker on my pencil. If you feel like you've pressed down a little hard on your pencil, we can do this to lighten it up. We can take our eraser, take the side of our eraser, and just go over the top of our drawing like this. Get some of that excess graphite that we don't want off of there. All right, so I got one sketched in. Actually, let me add some of that. Let me see, do I need the other finger? I'm looking at the relationship here. So if the end of this finger is right about here, and then here is where the palm of the hand starts. Yeah, I do need a little bit of a partial view of that finger as well. This is where zooming in definitely helps because you can see where something's cut off. Whereas I'm kind of going to think about it a little more. And then we've got this big shadow. Oh, sorry. Let my paper drift up there. I just added, oh my gosh, I got to get my iPad away from the screen. It's messing with the light on the Zoom. I just added a little bit of this finger. So yours is going to be slightly different though, right? So take note of anything that's in that view when you zoom in. All right, let's see, how am I going to crop it for this second one? I feel like I want to do something a little different. There's only so much we can do with this one hand and still make it interesting. I'm wondering if I want part of the wrist in there, but I feel like those curled fingers are just Maybe I'll do this time. Something like that. Okay, so again, I'm looking at the negative space, which actually this makes for some really interesting negative space, cropping it like that, because now I've got, I'm trying to get away from my reflection being on the iPad. I've got this fun little V shape, and I've got that interesting negative space shape again over here, and then this V shape, and then this shape, which feels like a little mountain, a little plateau. Okay. So I'm gonna start with my little plateau mountain shape over here. This is fun. I'm excited. I'm excited about y'all's drawings because I like it when I don't do this very often, where it's forcing everyone in the class to do their own version. I can feel y'all's concentration, especially because there's not a lot of questions, which tells me everybody is really focused, or just Rich is not interrupting me to tell me the questions. Okay, so I'm just looking at the negative space right now to start. And let me know if anybody wants me to draw these shapes darker on that scratch paper again, because I will.
No questions yet, Adrian. I think everyone's pretty focused.
Awesome. I feel like I'm doing my job, but I got y'all all so focused. Yeah, this is a fun one, the way I zoomed in here, because I've got all these really interesting. I think the way I did it, though, I'm not going to get the thumb in there. I'm not going to be able to squeeze the thumb in, but that's okay because I've got all these interesting shapes to focus on. And I really love doing hand studies like this. This is one of those exercises that, as I said before, I feel like really sets people up for success, and it makes the hand not as scary and intimidating to draw because you're only drawing part of it. And it also, it gives you, I've been reading a lot of books lately on dopamine, if y'all can't tell, just with all my brain science factoids tonight. But like whatever you can do to set yourself up for long-term success is what we want, which is we're like anytime we're exercising or drawing or doing something just for the process of it, that's where you're getting those long-term rewards. But then you also want to get some, like, we want some success. We want like a quick hit of dopamine, right? Like looking at Instagram will give you that, or scrolling social media or whatever. But doing these little studies like this, it gives you this sense of, oh, this isn't as hard as I'm making it out to be. And you get this little success, and it hopefully makes you want to keep working towards those long-term successes that come with all that practice, where you're maybe drawing a bunch of full hands in ways that are not perfect, but it's all part of the process. And the more you can delay that gratification for yourself, the better, but it doesn't hurt to sometimes do something that's going to give you that quick sense of accomplishment. And that's what a little study like this can be like. Okay, so just sketching in the rest of the shapes of the fingers, making some adjustments to my negative space as I go. And then I'm going to start to look at those value shapes. And I'll be the first to admit, hands are still a struggle for me. There's this great New Yorker cartoon that shows a little morbid, but it's a like the white chalk outline that's done around a body on the ground, and but the chalk outline that's on the ground shows a person whose hands are in their pockets. The caption on the cartoon is, eventually you're going to have to learn how to draw hands, because that's what a lot of artists will do, is just put the hands in the pockets, right? For cover the hands up, pretend they're not there, because they're so challenging to draw. And I get it. And I will often in a figure drawing class leave the hands when I'm drawing a model. It's like, oh, I'm more interested in the other parts of the model right now. I'm just gonna save the hands for later, unless the model puts their hand right up by their face, and then you can't ignore it. But it's all about the light. It's all about those value shapes and those contours. And if you just ignore everything else and just look at the light, that's telling you everything you need to know. But they are very challenging subject, and it's really hard to get away from that elementary school symbol of a hand, you know, a little like little hamburger helper glove or something like that, that flat two-dimensional cartoonish version of a hand, right? I joked last week when we were doing our blind contour drawings, I didn't want to see any hamburger helper gloves. I'm outing myself as an 80s kid. Is hamburger helper even relevant anymore? Anyway, now we're looking at these value shapes, these shapes of shadows. And again, they might be kind of hard to see because when the fingers are curled over like that, there's a lot of shadows happening here in the palm of the hand. So a lot of the values are similar, but still we're looking for this little organic moment where it's a little darker and we're exaggerating our highlights. So we're leaving a lot more blank paper on our drawing when we start to add the pen than we maybe would if we were going to fill this in more accurately with graphite. So we're trying to create more of an effect, a high contrast effect with our pens shortly. So just try to find those little baguette shapes, right? That you're seeing where there's the crease and there's more of a dark shadow around the crease. There's a pretty heavy shadow all across the center of the palm that the fingers are creating. A pretty heavy shadow there. But try to give yourself some kind of a shape across all of the areas of the fingers, because we don't want to leave too much blank paper, and we definitely don't want to have just a hard outline and pen around this. But again, you do whatever you want. If you end up with a hard outline around it, and then that's cool, but that's not what I'm aiming for here. I want to give myself some shapes to fill in with the hatching and cross hatching. So the more I give myself these closed shapes, even though they're not closed, the more I'm going to have something to fill in when we start adding the pen and ink. All right. I've got mine sketched out and we're in good shape as far as time. We still have 45 minutes and we might even finish early the more I think about it here. So I'm going to switch gears a little bit and talk about these pens, and then we will come back to our sketch and add the pen and ink. So if you're still drawing that, that's cool. Put a little tab on this and go to a blank page so I can talk about our line work with our pen and ink. Okay, so I have a lot of pens here. I've got a huge set of Artist Loft pens because I recently taught a kids camp in pen and ink. So I'm just making sure all the ones that I have here are working. All right, so I'm just gonna start making some marks with my pens and just see the thickness and the thinness of the pens that I have here. And like I said, I'm making sure that all my pens work because I was using them with a kids camp and it's possible that some of them have dried up and then got stuck back in my thing. So anyway, but this is also helpful so that we can see the thickness. Oh, let me scooch that down. We can see the thickness and the thinness of our line. So I'm just writing down which one of the pens I have, and I'm making a few little hatching lines and writing which pen that is that made that thickness of a line. And that's another 0.05 or 0.5. It looked different somehow, so I still wanted to sketch with it. It also helps if you happen to have one that is running out of ink. So like this one is running out of ink a little bit, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. So if you have one that's running out of ink, don't throw it away yet. That can actually be really helpful when we get to those lighter values. This is my 0.3 nib. Okay, so as you're testing out your nibs, you decide, once again, you are choosing your own adventure in so many areas tonight. You decide which one of these pens you are going to use for the majority of your drawing. And I'll tell you which one I'm using for sure when we get rolling here. Okay, so here's my 1.0. That's going to be pretty thick. And honestly, I think I used the same size pen nibs the whole time. I think I should really write these things down. I'm pretty sure I used one of the smaller ones, like a 0.1. That sounds like me. That sounds like something I would do, but it is nice to have like this 0.03 might be nice. Those of you who are unsure about your drawing abilities with the pens, if you're new to drawing with pens, you use the lightest nib that you have. So that would be possibly, there's a 0.05 here as well. 0.05, that's going to be even smaller than the 0.03. So that could be a good option. Just try one more here. I'm just curious. Okay, yeah, our 0.8 is pretty thick as well. Oh, and I also have a, oh, I already did that, the 0.03. Okay. So let's make a value scale here from dark to light so you can see which ones of these nibs are the thickest, right? Your 1.0 and your 0.8 and your 0.5 are going to be the higher the number. Obviously, the 1.0 is your thickest. And then the lightest is going to be the stuff that has more zeros in front of it. I am probably going to do a lot of my drawing with this point 0.1, 0.1 to 0.1. So I'm going to set that one off to the side, but I want to make a value scale from dark to light using our pens here. So we're going to draw a long skinny rectangle. Draw two long skinny rectangles actually, and we're just focusing on hatching and cross hatching. But there are 4 pen and ink shading techniques, and Rich has the link to another class from last year on these value shading techniques in pen and ink and applying them to a 3-dimensional form, to a lime, and looking at that line from multiple different directions and how the value shapes and the contours change. And so that class covers hatching, cross-hatching, stippling, and scribbling. It's called Learn to Draw 3D Forms, Understanding Value Shapes. And if you're watching later on YouTube, you can check that out later. But you don't necessarily need to watch that class right now. That's just if you need some extra help with this later. Well, we're going to label our value scale 0 to 10. And our 0 is our blank paper, or our absolute light. Or absolute white, I guess, if you were like if you were drawing on black paper and you had a white pen, then it would be the absolute white instead of the blank paper. And then our 10 is going to be our absolute black. But in our drawing tonight, we already talked about how we're exaggerating our light a little bit. So we're leaving more blank space because we talked about how dark some of those values are and how they blend. And you're welcome to make it darker. I just think with the background that we're adding, leaving more blank space will help us have contrast in the drawing, some higher contrast. So we have to have, we have to have some absolute white and some absolute black in order to have some full contrast happening. I like to start on the darker side of the value scale when I'm making a value scale and then work my way out to the lighter side because I find that a lot of people are a little heavy-handed. So, but with hatching, it's just one directional lines. So all the places on our hand drawing where we just have one directional lines, those are our hatching lines. And then the cross hatching is where we have multiple directional lines. So like right here, I've done cross hatching because I've gone back over in multiple directions, but in a lot of parts of the hand, we're going to stick to just hatching lines. But you're welcome to add cross hatching all the way around. So well, let's just practice adding just one directional lines. And so for an absolute black shadow, we're going to overlap those lines until we get an absolute black. We've got no paper peeking through. And in order to have this high contrast, we want some areas of our hand to go that black. And a lot of people are scared to make their values that dark with a pen because they're scared to not be able to erase it, but we have to have that in order to have that dramatic effect. So, and then for our 9 on the value scale, it's almost as dark as the black, but we've got some paper peeking through. And then this is where I'm going to go ahead and switch to like the 0.5 nib. And we're just spacing out our lines, letting up on the pressure on the pen. So when we get to a mid-tone here, that's where we're going to have like even spacing, but then we want this to blend out. So we're going to go back over it. We want it to feel nice and blended. So we're blending through the spacing of the lines and the pressure that we're putting on the pen. So we want this gradual shift. Your value scale does not have to be perfect. Nothing has to be perfect. We're just getting an understanding of how to create light and dark values with our pens. And then we can switch to our even smaller nibs, like the 0.1. And we could do this whole value scale with a 0.1. It's just helpful to go ahead and get that solid black to happen with the thicker nib because it'll happen a little faster. And this is where I was saying a pen that's running out of ink can be helpful because some people have a hard time letting up on the pressure on the pen. So you can think about using your whole arm to draw and kind of locking your wrist so that the pressure, the movement is coming from your bicep, it's coming from your whole arm, and that's how you can really control the amount of pressure that you're putting on the pen. But using a pen that's drying up can also be really helpful because the ink is just not really coming out that strong. So that's going to help you to get those lighter values. But if you feel like every time you make a mark with the pen, you're getting the same thickness of the line, then practice just really putting light pressure on the pen. Use your whole arm a little bit. Maybe hover over the page. See if you can just get some really light action to happen. Okay. And then we'll do our cross hatching. So like I said, you could do this whole thing with a thicker nib, like I'll use the 0.3 here. But this time we're doing multiple directional lines. So maybe you have vertical and horizontal and diagonal lines. Now we've got, so now we've got multiple directional lines. They're still overlapping to get to a solid black. And then I like to just, to make my value scale, use my whole arm movement and let up on my pressure and like drag it down like this. And just kind of do it all at once. Hatching, cross hatching goes pretty fast, I think, compared to hatching and definitely stippling, which we're not talking about tonight, but that's the one with the dots. That's the easiest one to execute, but it takes a lot of patience. All right, so we're just getting an understanding of how we can let up on our pressure and how we can get lighter and darker values to happen with our pens. So it's through overlapping and the physical amount of pressure that you're putting on the pen. I don't know who said this, but I quote this all the time, that I heard once, that all art is just a matter of patience and pressure. And I love that because it's the physical pressure that you're putting on the mark making tool that you're using or the paintbrush or whatever. The physical pressure that you put on it. Patience is all the practice that you have to put in, the patience that you have to have with yourself and with the process. But then it could also be the metaphorical pressure that we put on ourselves or that other people put on us. So you can take that literally or figuratively. Patience and pressure. Okay, so we got a good understanding of our hatching and cross hatching, and now we are ready to add our value to our drawings. But actually, just to set y'all up for even more success here, let's do a quick little exercise because I think we've still got plenty of time. Let's do this. I am teaching a drawing and painting with ink class right now, and I came up with this idea recently to help people with the idea of value shapes. I was like, let's practice, let's draw some little blobby shapes. In fact, let's draw some shapes that maybe look like the shapes on the side of the fingers, like those little baguette, little grass things. So just draw some random shapes, right? Okay. And then just practice a little bit with your pens, filling in those shapes, whatever shapes you drew, whatever blobby shapes, but try to blend out the value that you add. So start out dark on one side and practice blending, and then maybe even try to make your shape feel three-dimensional by curving around the edges. So if you made it rounded, then curve your value so that it feels rounded. Just for some extra practice here, just to think about, because I'm worried that it would be really easy to just take your pen and do this. Like, let's say this is one of the, and you've got your little shape, but you're like scared to put the value in there. So it might be kind of easy to just do this, to just kind of outline the finger shape with your pen. And I want us to try not to do that. I want us to really fill in these shapes that we added here tonight. The more we practice filling in a blobby shape, the more we start to think about how the intention of these shading techniques is that we're using them to fill in the shapes of the shadows and the shapes of the light. Even in the lighter areas, we're using this lighter hatching and cross hatching. And just practice making some three-dimensional blobs here. And this will also help you to do that little wrist flicking motion. I've got my whole arm elevated right now so that I can lock my wrist. I saw a question just pop up that looked interesting. Is there a way to incorporate pen and pencil? Of course, you can always combine, add some graphite value in there if you want. Although I feel like the pen value might overpower the pencil value, but that's always an option. Okay, so I feel like I just filled in those blobby shapes really dark, but hopefully you're feeling nice and comfortable with the idea of hatching and cross hatching and filling in value shapes. Boy, that's the pen that's dying. And I was saying, those of you who have, just some hesitation about drawing in pen and ink, using your smallest nib, like that 0.05 or that 0.03 would be good, because all the lines that you're going to start out with are going to be super light, and then that way you can kind of build up to the darker value. So on the value scale, I think it's helpful to start with the black and let up on our pressure. but as we're drawing, it's good to start with the lighter value on the pen. And then, like, if you're a beginning artist and you've never drawn with pens before, I would not take your 0.8 nib or your 1.0 nib and start on this hand, because you're going to end up with some really dark lines that you can't erase. Okay, so I'm going to use my 0.1 quite a bit, and I am going to start out pretty light with that one that's dying, that 0.03. There it is. And I want one more 0.03 just in case, or that 0.05, where'd it go? There it is. Okay, yeah, I'm gonna start out with this 0.03 and this 0.05. All right. So get our reference photos back out here and start to add some value. And I'm going to start in the darkest areas.
Adrian, we have a question. Someone, Goose Moose, is asking, is it possible to incorporate pencil and pen and ink?
Yes, definitely. You can always combine them. Okay, so I'm looking at these darkest areas and I'm going in with my light pen and I'm curving around. Sorry, my cord is in my way here. I'm gonna curl my hatching so that it curves around the contours here. So I'm hugging the side. So just like last week, we spent all that time talking about making our lines hug the curves of the contours of the form. And I'm switching the direction that I'm approaching my paper with my hand frequently. And I advise that you do the same, that you find a way. I'll actually switch to my forward facing view for just a second and just demonstrate how so I realize you can't see my drawing for a second, but I want you to watch what my arm is doing as I'm doing this. So notice how my arm is lifted off of the table, like my bicep is up in the air. And I'm kind of flicking my wrist. My wrist is a bit locked, but the movement is coming from my whole arm. So I just can't stress that enough, that controlling your pen using your whole arm movement is going to enable you to control the lines that you're making more. And if you're not feeling that yet, then that's something to practice. But I'm just doing one little line at a time, and each line is hugging the contours. And if you're like, well, my lines don't look like that, then keep in mind that I've got lots of years of practice over here on my side, and I wish I could download those years of practice into everyone that I teach, but unfortunately we all have to put in those hours of practice on our own. But no one ever told me that about holding my arm that way when I was learning. And it's just something I figured out after lots of practice. So I'm bouncing around though. That's another thing that I find really helpful, is not staying in the same area for too long. Although some artists do like to strongly develop one area at a time and then make their way around where everything is just fully developed in that one area before they move on. And for me, that doesn't always work for me. So I like to jump around. because I find that keeps me from overworking an area or second guessing myself or uh, overthinking, because sometimes if I stay in this is just for me though, this is just a preference, but a lot of people probably relate. If I stay in the same area for too long and I start to question if it looks right, whereas if I jump around, I start to see the whole a lot faster. And I'm also moving my paper around a little bit. As I said before, I'm approaching the paper from a different direction. Like maybe I'm coming in from this side or I'm coming in from this side. That also helps me to control the amount of pressure that I'm putting on my pen. And I'm using that 0.05, so one of the smallest nibs. And that's because I can still overlap that to get a pretty dark value to happen, but I can also get a really light value to happen. And I also like to leave gaps in between some places because I think that makes for a more interesting composition. If there are some broken empty spaces in between the values, and I did that a lot here. And that also creates interesting line weight. And line weight is the thickness and thinness of your lines. And a lot of people have a hard time variegating their line weight, which is another thing that just comes with practice. So jumping around is another way that you can ensure that, because you're leaving gaps. So invariably you're going to have some variation in your line weight. All right, so yeah, see how it's starting to feel like that finger is curled, it's bent and coming at us. And all we did was, or all I did, like we did it together. Y'all helped me. All right, so I got the first layer there, and now I can go back in and add another layer and start to overlap a little more in that area where I need that darkest value and start to blend out. And as I said before, you might have already developed this area and then moved on if you want to just fully develop the value and then move on. I find I can control what I do a little better if I jump around. And if it looks like there's a hard outline around the edge of the finger, then maybe you do go ahead and outline that, but I would resist the urge to do that all the way around, because we're going to try to get some implied line. We are going to do that in a minute. I am, but I'm going to leave it a little open in some places. So yeah, like right here on the fingernail might be a good moment to hover a little bit with your pen. Let that line be a little open. And I might just do this whole thing with the 0.05, even after talking about all those different nibs. Mostly I say that so that y'all can just went through all those different nib sizes so that y'all can decide which pens you prefer. Maybe y'all have heard me say this before if you come to a lot of these classes, but I have this line I say to my in-person students all the time in my beginner classes, that making art is like dating yourself, because people are like, well, what paintbrush should I be using? And it's like, well, I don't know. You have to figure out what your favorite paintbrush is. Like, I can tell you what my favorite paintbrushes are, but personally, I never use a fan brush. And you might decide that the fan brush is your favorite paintbrush. And if you only used the paintbrushes that I use, You would never discover that about yourself. So I'm like, you have to, like when you're first dating someone, you don't know anything about them. You have to date them for a while and learn about them. And so if you're a beginning artist, you don't know a lot of things about yourself. And so you have to date yourself for a while and figure out what your favorite pen nib is. All right. We spent so much time on all that other stuff, and then now we got 15 minutes, but we're going to get through this. We don't have that much to fill in, except there is this big shadow across the palm. Plus, everybody's drawing's a little bit different, so you're not necessarily drawing the exact same view of the hand as I am. And even if I don't finish the second one, I think y'all will be able to complete these on your own, since we've done so much. We've pre-gamed it so much. I was teaching a gouache painting class earlier today and talking about how all the things that I like to do before I start a painting are I'm front-ending all of the hard work. When you do as much prepping and preliminary sketching and practice like we did tonight, then by the time you get to the point where you're executing it, like it's just drawing itself right now, right? Don't you all feel like you're not even doing hardly any work because you already did all the hard work? So I'm using some cross hatching in this palm of the hand, but I'm mostly sticking to hatching for the fingers. All right, and then once you feel super warmed up, you're ready for this. I'm gonna turn the paper this direction. I find it easier to do it this way. We're gonna add this background hatching layer, but I left these very open. I'm gonna get that kind of close up to the camera. See how I left some of them open? I even have like a dotted line in there a couple times. So that's another one of the things where I want you to try to lock your arm. We're going to add this one directional hatching line all the way around to the background. And we're not going to worry about if these lines are totally straight. We'll let them be kind of open. We had a class early on in this, or I had a class. I always say we, but a lot of y'all were there. Had some of the regulars in these classes since the very beginning in July 2021, but it was, oh, what was the name of that class? Something about starting and keeping a sketchbook practice. Actually had a private lesson student the other day who attended that class and still does a lot of the exercises in that class. One of them was just to fill a page like this, to just fill a page with stripes or with one directional hatching lines like this, just an evenly spaced hatching value all the way around. I'm leaving a bit, you could leave a little bit of a gap between the finger and the edge, or you could go all the way to the edge of the finger. It looks like I went all the way to the edge of the finger with these, but today I'm leaving a little bit of a gap. And then while you're being nice and delicate like this would be a good time to go ahead and give yourself a nice little implied line in all those light value places, but where you still want a little bit of an outline, like around the finger edge, even though it's super light, I'm just giving it a real light, like passing over it. And then I'm also going to outline the outer edge of that playing card, same way. And I cannot stress enough how much I'm using my whole arm movement right now. I bet you didn't know that your drawing practice was going to give you such a bicep workout. But that's how you can really control that light pressure. Also, if you mess up on that, I don't advise immediately trying to fix it. Maybe pause for a second. One of my funny lines I like to say is never in the history of a line has a line been made thinner by going over it again. Because the second somebody messes up on a line, they like want to go over it and do it again. And it's like, then it just makes it thicker. And if you're trying to make the line thinner, it's never going to happen by going over it again. You're just going to keep making it thicker. So it's better to just leave it alone for a second, regain your composure, and then try again and see if you can. Because I did have to go over that one again. And so I did make my line a little thicker, but don't do that in a panic. Because then you'll probably just make it really thick. But you could just outline the whole thing nice and thick if it got away from you, you know. All right. So there's one hand study. I didn't quite finish my other one. I got 7 minutes. Let me see if I can do this in 7 minutes. We could also probably go over a couple minutes if that's okay with you, Rich. Are you good with that?
I'm good with that.
Okay, cool. I'm gonna go kind of quickly here. Let's see if I can fill this one in. I want to at least just get it started. Should say that the other reason I like to use a thin pen and then just overlap all my value is I think it creates more interesting value, and that could just be my opinion. But sometimes I feel like the thicker nib can, fill up the area of dark so fast. that you don't get that same effect that happens when you use a small nib and then build up the dark value. But again, that's my opinion. All right, I think that's probably good enough. I didn't quite finish the second one, but I just wanted to get something on it and at least get some of this background in before we stop for the night. And then I'd love to see how far y'all were able to get on these. So if you want to hold them up, we can spotlight you. The autumn here. Oh yeah, look at that. Oh, that looks like a ballpoint pen. I love it. Ballpoint pens are really great for drawing like this because you can really blend them out like that. Yeah, that's great. No plug for Etna. Says Eliza. All right, yeah, look at that nice, those hatching lines. Very nice. See Cecilia. Oh, that's gorgeous, Cecilia. Yes. Really nice. Look at those folds and all that lovely hatching and cross hatching. Great work. This is Barbara. Oh, Barbara, I love the implied line that's happening there. That feels so nice and sketchy and very gestural. Lovely work. Oh, there's my buddy Arthur. Nice to see you, Arthur. It's been a while. It's been a while since we've spotlighted you. Maybe you've been here recently. I love it. Yeah, you did a lot of those too. Oh, I love your value on those 3D shapes that you did off to the side too. Really nice work. Yeah, again, great gesture happening in those. Oh, and here's Goose Moose. I love it. Yeah, that's some really intense value you got going there. I'm really feeling the 3 dimensions from how those cross-hatching lines are hugging the 3 dimensions of the form there. I love your signature too. Is Patty? You want to hold it up a little higher? Yeah. Oh, Patty, beautiful. Really nice. I love your line work in the background. And that was that pen. Okay, cool. So just a nice flowy pen. All right. Yeah, that's gorgeous. Hold that up a little higher. I love it. Oh, you got the whole hand in there too. Didn't zoom in so much, but that's lovely. Great line work.
Sorry, Adrian, I'm getting lost with so many participants. I'm flipping through trying to find you again.
Oh, okay, that's all right. Oh, here, let me see. I could spotlight myself.
Here it
Oh,
is.
oh,
I got you. Sorry
okay,
about that.
that's all right. All right, well, we just went a minute over. And next week's class, I don't have the example handy, but it's really fun. We're going to be drawing this Polaroid box, although we're not going to highlight the word Polaroid too much. We're going to focus more on the perspective of the box and the colors, the rainbow um, design on the side of the Polaroid box. So, and I've included reference images for that class. We're going to be using the alcohol-based markers, the alcohol Artist Loft alcohol-based markers, and that's going to be a really fun class. It's been a while since we've done any linear perspective, so I thought we would refresh that concept, looking at just a very simple rectangular prism, just a box, but it'll be nice and fun little marker study. So hope to see y'all for that class next Wednesday. And thank you for all the lovely feedback. Really enjoyed it. And yeah, don't forget to tag your work with those hashtags. Make it with Michael's or Michael's classes, and tag me on Instagram at 80 Hodge so that I can see your work, and you can tag at Learn with Michaels as well, and they might even share your work on their Instagram. So that'll be fun. Thank you all so much, and thank you, Rich. Y'all have a wonderful evening.